The night shift always started the same way. Muted voices at the nurse's station. The smell of disinfectant lingering in the air. Monitors humming softly behind closed doors. The hospital at night wasn't chaotic like people imagined. It was slow, restrained, almost careful not to wake itself. I clocked in at 10:47 p.m. and tied my badge back onto my scrub top, already falling into routine. Same ward as usual. Medical floor. Nothing critical scheduled overnight. Just monitoring, meds, and making sure things stayed quiet. The head nurse, Linda, handed over the clipboard and went through the report with practiced efficiency. Rooms 201, 203, and 208 are occupied. Stable. 205 and 207 were discharged this afternoon. Beds are empty, she said, tapping the list with her pen. Housekeeping already cleared them. I nodded and repeated the numbers in my head. It was a habit. Empty rooms mattered almost as much as full ones. You needed to know where not to go. Linda hesitated, then reached under the counter and slid a laminated sheet toward me. "This is new," she said. "Night protocol update. Administration wants everyone on nights to read it." I glanced at it without much interest. Laminated sheets usually meant hygiene reminders or reminders about patient confidentiality. Important, but nothing unexpected. "All right," I said. "I'll take a look." She was already packing up her bag. "Quiet night," she added, the way people always did, tempting fate without meaning to. Then she was gone. The ward settled into its nighttime state almost immediately. Overhead lights dimmed automatically, leaving only the softer, indirect lighting along the floor and at the nurse's station. The hallway stretched out in both directions, empty and clean, the polished floor reflecting the ceiling lights in dull streaks. I took a moment to orient myself. Room 201, occupied. 203, occupied. 205, empty. 207, empty. 208, occupied. I walked the hall once, slow and unhurried, checking door placards and monitors. Everything matched the report. The empty rooms were quiet, beds neatly made, monitors dark. Back at the station, I picked up the laminated sheet. At first glance, it looked exactly like what I'd expected. Black text, simple font. No hospital logo at the top, which struck me as odd, but I didn't think much of it. I skimmed the first few lines, expecting something about sanitation or documentation. Instead, I saw numbers. Rules. I frowned and leaned closer, reading more carefully. 1. Do not enter patient rooms that were empty at the start of your shift. If a bed was unoccupied during handover, it must remain so. I paused. That wasn't a hygiene guideline. I read it again, slower. The wording was precise. Not should, not avoid. Must remain so. I moved on. 2. If a monitor displays vital signs for a bed without a patient, do not adjust the cables. Step back and notify the charge nurse. That one made some sense, at least on the surface. Equipment malfunction. Liability. Still. Specific. I shifted my weight and kept reading. 3. Never respond to call lights from rooms listed as vacant. If the light continues, log the time only. My eyes flicked down the hallway without thinking. The call light panel at the station was dark, as it should be. I swallowed and continued. 4. If a patient addresses you by name without being told, leave the room immediately. Do not correct them. That rule didn't belong in a hospital. I felt a faint chill run up my arms, though the temperature hadn't changed. I told myself it was poorly worded training material, nothing more. I read the last one. 5. Do not remain alone on the ward after 3 a.m. If you cannot locate another staff member, end your shift procedures and wait at the nurse's station. I lowered the sheet and stared at it for a long moment. The hospital around me was quiet. Normal. The steady beeping of monitors from occupied rooms blended into the background like white noise. Somewhere down the hall, an IV pump clicked softly. This had to be some kind of internal joke, or outdated protocol from years ago that never got taken down. Hospitals were full of old paperwork that lingered long past its relevance. Still, the fact that Linda had handed it to me, serious, unamused, bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I folded the sheet once, then unfolded it again, reading through all 5 rules from top to bottom. I committed them to memory without realizing I was doing it, especially the room numbers. Room 205 was empty at the start of my shift. I placed the laminated sheet face down on the desk and opened the logbook. Time. Patient status. Everything normal. I wrote neatly, deliberately, grounding myself in the routine. The first few hours passed exactly as expected. I administered meds, checked vitals, answered the occasional call light from occupied rooms. Patients slept or stared at televisions turned low. Nothing unusual. No alarms, no emergencies. The empty rooms stayed empty. Every now and then, my eyes drifted to the laminated sheet on the desk. Each time, I told myself I was overthinking it. Hospitals were strange places even on good nights. Long hours played tricks on your perception. By midnight, boredom settled in. The safe, familiar kind. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the ward breathe around me. The machines, the distant footsteps of security on another floor, the quiet persistence of life being monitored and recorded. I glanced once more down the hall, mentally ticking off the rooms. Occupied, occupied, empty, empty, occupied. Everything was exactly where it should be. I remember thinking, briefly, that this would be an easy shift. Then I turned back to the desk, unaware of how closely I'd already started following the rules. The first thing that caught my attention wasn't a sound. It was a rhythm. I was halfway through charting vitals at the nurse's station when I noticed a steady, electronic pulse threading itself into the background noise of the ward. At first, my brain dismissed it as one of the occupied rooms, someone shifting, a monitor recalibrating, nothing worth looking up for. Then I realized the rhythm wasn't coming from where it should have been. I looked at the central monitor panel. Room 205 was showing a heart rate, a clean, regular waveform, 72 beats per minute, oxygen saturation steady, blood pressure cycling at normal intervals. Room 205 had been empty since before my shift started. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, waiting for the signal to collapse into static or error codes. It didn't. The lines were crisp, confident, the kind of readings you like to see. My first thought was crossed cables. It happens sometimes, especially on older wards. A loose lead, a mislabeled channel, one bed bleeding into another on the system. Annoying, but harmless once you tracked it down. I stood and checked the room assignments again. 201, occupied. 203, occupied. 205, vacant. 207, vacant. 208, occupied. I tapped the screen lightly, pulling up the data feed. The signal was definitely assigned to 205. Okay, I muttered, more to myself than anything else. I grabbed the clipboard and walked down the hall toward 205, already running through the fix in my head. I'd disconnect the leads, trace them back, make sure nothing was cross-linked with 203 next door. The hallway felt the same as it had earlier. Quiet, dim, unremarkable. My shoes made soft, controlled sounds against the floor. As I approached the door to 205, the monitor continued its steady rhythm, audible now through the wall. I stopped just short of the door. The room was dark. The bed inside was exactly as I remembered it from earlier, neatly made, sheets pulled tight, no sign anyone had been there since housekeeping finished. The monitor above the bed was on, its screen glowing softly, displaying the same stable vitals I'd seen at the station. For a moment, I just stood there. No patient, no leads attached, no cables connected to anything. The monitor didn't care. I stepped closer, then stopped myself. Rule 2 surfaced in my mind, not dramatically, just as a remembered line of text. If a monitor displays vital signs for a bed without a patient, do not adjust the cables. I hadn't intended to. Not yet. I leaned in just enough to confirm what I was seeing, keeping my hands to myself. The cables lay coiled and untouched at the side of the bed. Nothing was plugged in. Nothing that should have been transmitting data. The heart rate remained steady. I backed out of the room and closed the door, more unsettled than I wanted to admit. At the station, I noted the time and wrote a brief line about a possible monitor malfunction, planning to notify the charge nurse if it persisted. 5 minutes later, the signal vanished. Room 205 returned to its proper status. Blank, dark, silent. I told myself that was the end of it. It wasn't. The call light chimed shortly after. A single soft tone from the panel above the station. Polite, restrained. I looked up automatically. Room 207, one of the empty rooms. My first reaction was irritation. Call light systems could be touchy. A loose wire, a cleaning cart bumping a panel. It happened. I glanced at the laminated sheet on the desk without meaning to. Never respond to call lights from rooms listed as vacant. I frowned. This was exactly what I'd assumed the rule was about. Malfunctions. Time-wasting nonsense during already long shifts. I told myself I'd just go in, reset the panel, and be done with it. The light continued to glow. I stood, grabbed my badge, and walked down the hall toward 207. The closer I got, the quieter everything felt. Not silent, just muted, as if the ward were paying attention in a way it hadn't before. The light above the door was on, steady and patient. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed was untouched, sheets smooth, pillow centered. No signs of recent use, no movement, no sound. As soon as I stepped inside, the call light shut off. Not gradually, not after I reached for the panel. It stopped the instant my foot crossed the threshold. I froze. For a few seconds, I didn't move or breathe. I just stood there listening, waiting for some mechanical click or delayed response that would explain it. Nothing came. I reached out and pressed the call button manually. It responded immediately, lighting up as it should. I released it, and it went dark again. Normal behavior. My pulse had picked up, though I couldn't have said why. I checked the bathroom, then the closet, more out of habit than concern. The room was empty in every sense that mattered. I stepped back into the hallway and closed the door. The ward returned to its previous state, the hum of machines resuming its familiar pattern. I walked back to the station more slowly this time, replaying the moment in my head. Call lights failed. Monitors glitched. That was the explanation. It had to be. I wrote the time down anyway. The rest of the hour passed without incident. I kept busy with small tasks, checking charts that didn't need checking, reorganizing supplies that were already in order. Each time I glanced at the monitor panel, I half expected to see another anomaly. It stayed quiet. Just before 2, I poured myself another cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, staring down the hallway. The empty rooms looked the same as they always had. Doors closed, lights off. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Hospitals had rhythms, patterns. Sometimes those patterns hiccuped. I didn't think about rules anymore. I didn't think about the laminated sheet. I didn't connect what had happened to anything larger. At the time, it all still felt isolated, unrelated. Just a series of small, explainable problems in a building full of aging equipment. And I had no idea that I'd already crossed a line. Only that something on the ward had noticed I was willing to step into a room that wasn't supposed to matter. By 2:30 a.m., the ward no longer felt settled. Nothing obvious had changed. The lights were still dimmed. The floors were clean. The machines continued their steady, regulated sounds. But the sense of routine I'd relied on earlier had thinned out, like something stretched too far. I noticed the monitors first. Room 205 was active again. So was 207. Both showed stable vital signs. Normal heart rates, clean waveforms, no alarms, no warning indicators. Just quiet, confident data being displayed where none should have existed. I checked the assignments for a third time, slower now, tracing each line with my finger. 205. Vacant. 207. Vacant. I stood up and walked the length of the hall, stopping at each occupied room. The patients who were supposed to be there were still there, breathing, sleeping, alive in the ordinary way. The empty rooms were another matter. The door to 205 was closed. I hadn't closed it. I stood there for a moment, hand hovering inches from the handle, listening. The faint electronic pulse from the monitor seeped through the wall, steady and unhurried. I opened the door. The bed was occupied, not dramatically, Not suddenly, just occupied. A figure lay beneath the sheets, positioned neatly, as if placed there by someone who knew exactly how a patient should look. The blanket was pulled up to mid-chest. The head rested against the pillow, turned slightly away from the light. The face was mostly in shadow. The monitor above the bed matched the readings I'd seen at the station. Heart rate steady. Oxygen saturation good. No signs of distress. I took a step closer, then stopped. I didn't recognize the patient. That alone wasn't unusual. Admissions happened late sometimes. Charts were updated. People were transferred. Mistakes got made. But there was no chart at the foot of the bed. No wristband visible on the arm resting just above the blanket. The patient didn't move. I waited for the rise and fall of breathing. It was there, subtle but present. "Hello?" I said quietly, keeping my voice low out of habit. No response. I backed out of the room and closed the door, my pulse quickening despite myself. At the nurse's station, I pulled up the digital records again, cross-checking admissions, transfers, discharges. Nothing. Room 205 was still listed as empty. I refreshed the system, logged out and back in, checked the handwritten board behind the desk. Same result. I told myself there was a delay, some administrative lag between departments. That happened, especially overnight. It wasn't my job to resolve it alone. Still, I couldn't bring myself to sit down. When I walked past 205 again a few minutes later, the door was open. The patient was still there. This time, the head had shifted slightly, angled more toward the hallway. The face remained indistinct, details swallowed by shadow, but I could feel the attention in the way the body was positioned. I stopped just outside the doorway. "Can I help you?" I asked. The patient didn't answer. I stood there longer than necessary, waiting for a call light, a hand movement, anything that would anchor the situation in something familiar. When nothing happened, I turned away, unsettled but unwilling to escalate without more information. That was when I heard my name. Daniel. It wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent, just spoken clearly, as if I were standing right beside the bed. I turned back. The patient's head was angled toward me now. The face was still hard to make out, but I knew the voice had come from the bed. "Yes?" I said, before I could stop myself. The word hung in the air between us. Rule 4 surfaced in my mind a fraction of a second too late. If a patient addresses you by name without being told, leave the room immediately. Do not correct them. I didn't leave. "How do you know my name?" I asked instead, stepping closer to the bed. The patient's lips moved, slowly, deliberately. "Is it morning yet?" The question landed with more weight than it should have. Not confused, not pleading, just factual, like someone asking for the time after a long wait. "No," I said, "it's still night." I realized what I'd done as soon as the words left my mouth. I had corrected them. The patient didn't react to my answer. The chest continued to rise and fall. The monitor remained steady, but the room felt different now, tighter, as if the space itself had closed in slightly. "You'll tell me when it is," the patient said. It wasn't a request. I stepped back, my heart pounding, and left the room without another word. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down until I reached the nurse's station and gripped the edge of the counter hard enough to steady myself. I stared down at the laminated sheet lying where I'd left it earlier. Rule 4. I'd stayed, I'd answered. Down the hall, a call light chimed, then another, then another. All from rooms that were supposed to be empty. The monitors continued to run smoothly, displaying calm, reassuring data that no longer reassured me at all. I stood there, breathing shallowly, understanding settling in with sick clarity. Whatever was happening on the ward wasn't a series of malfunctions anymore. It was a progression, and I was already behind. The ward changed after 3. There wasn't an announcement, no alarm, no clear signal that something had shifted. It was subtler than that, an absence where there should have been movement, a gap in the routine that my body noticed before my mind did. Someone was supposed to check in, at least one other nurse. sometimes security, sometimes transport. Even on the quietest nights, there was always someone, a passing silhouette, a door opening and closing, the soft crackle of a radio somewhere beyond the ward. At 3:02 a.m., none of that happened. I waited a few minutes, watching the hallway from the nurse's station. The lights remained dimmed. The floor reflected the glow evenly. Everything looked exactly as it had all night. Too exactly. I checked the staffing board behind the desk. 2 names besides mine. One assigned to the neighboring unit. One listed as on call for nights. Their shifts hadn't ended yet. They should have been somewhere in the building. I picked up the phone and dialed the internal extension for the adjacent ward. It rang and rang, then stopped on its own. No voicemail prompt, no error tone, just silence. I tried again, slower this time, carefully entering each number as if precision mattered. The result didn't change. The hospital wasn't dead. The systems were still alive. I could feel that in the steady airflow from the vents, the faint vibration of machinery running beneath the floors. But whatever layer existed between people, whatever allowed staff to overlap, to pass each other, to confirm presence, felt like it had been peeled away. I left the station and walked the hall, checking each doorway, each intersection where someone might appear. I didn't call out. The idea of hearing my own voice echo back at me felt wrong. No one was there. When I returned to the station, the call light panel was active. Room 205. I stared at it, my heart beginning to race. I didn't move. A few seconds later, it shut off. Room 207 lit up immediately after. Then another light appeared, one from a room farther down the hall, a number I hadn't memorized because it hadn't mattered before. The pattern repeated, one light at a time, no overlap, no escalation. Each one stayed illuminated long enough to demand attention, then turned off as if satisfied. I sat down slowly, keeping my eyes on the panel. The laminated sheet lay beside the keyboard, its surface catching the overhead light. I didn't need to pick it up. I knew the wording now. I could recite it if I had to. Never respond to call lights from rooms listed as vacant. I followed it. I watched instead. The monitors updated with every activation. Room 205 showed a steady heart rate. Room 207 followed suit. Then another empty room, its vitals calm and unremarkable. No alarms, no irregular spikes, nothing that would justify intervention. It felt intentional. I tried to ground myself by doing something practical. I checked inventory, counted supplies, straightened papers that were already straight. The movements were automatic, but they helped me stay upright, stay present. Time began to behave strangely. I checked the clock. 3:11 a.m. That seemed wrong. Too little time had passed for how tired I felt. My eyes burned. My limbs felt heavy, as if I'd been awake far longer than I actually had. I looked away, then back. 3:14 a.m. 3 minutes. That was it. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes for what I thought was a second. When I opened them, the clock read 3:14 a.m. No movement. No jump. I sat forward, suddenly alert, my pulse hammering. The call lights continued. On, off, on, always from the same set of rooms. I realized with a growing sense of unease that I could no longer remember the exact sequence of events leading up to this point. I knew what had happened in broad strokes. The monitor, the patient, the voice. But the details between those moments felt smudged, like fingerprints wiped from glass. I tried to reconstruct it. Had the first call light come before the second monitor? Had the patient spoken before or after the ward emptied? The answers slipped away as soon as I reached for them. The systems didn't seem to mind. The monitors displayed their numbers with unwavering confidence. The call lights obeyed their rhythm. The lights overhead stayed constant, never flickering, never dimming further. I was the only variable left. That realization settled in slowly, heavy and cold. I checked the clock again. 3:32 a.m. I hadn't noticed the time passing. The feeling of being watched intensified, not from any single direction, but from everywhere at once. From the ceiling speakers, from the panels, from the quiet awareness of the ward itself, tracking my position, my stillness, my compliance. I thought about Rule 5. Do not remain alone on the ward after 3 a.m. I was alone. I scanned the hallway again, hoping, irrationally, that someone would appear, that footsteps would echo, that a door would open somewhere beyond my field of vision. Nothing happened. The ward continued to function as if staffed, as if monitored, as if my presence was no longer required, but still expected. I stayed at the nurses' station because it felt like the last place where procedure still mattered, where shifts ended, where you waited when you didn't know what else to do. The call lights went on and off. The monitors remained steady, and as the minutes slipped past without meaning, I understood that whatever was happening didn't need me to act anymore. It just needed me to stay, still, and watch. The call light activated again, not sharply, not urgently. It came on the same way the others had, steady, unblinking, patient. I was standing at the nurses' station when it happened, staring at the monitors without really reading them. The number took a moment to register. Room 206. I frowned. That room hadn't existed for me all night. I knew the layout of the ward by heart by now. I'd walked it enough times. I knew which doors mattered and which didn't. Room 206 had never been part of my shift. Not occupied, not discharged, not mentioned. I checked the clipboard anyway, my fingers slow as I flipped the page. 201, occupied. 203, occupied. 205, vacant. 207, vacant. 208, occupied. Number 206. The call light stayed on. I waited. Seconds passed, then longer than seconds. The light didn't turn off the way the others had. It didn't cycle. It didn't reset. It was waiting. I felt a tightening in my chest as I stood up. I told myself, again, that I wasn't responding. I was checking, verifying, making sure there hadn't been an administrative mistake. That was still different in my mind. The hallway felt longer than it had earlier. The lighting hadn't changed, but the reflections on the floor seemed duller, stretched thin. The ward was quiet in a way that felt deliberate now, as if every sound had been filtered out. The door to room 206 was closed. The call light above it glowed steadily. I stopped a few feet away and listened. Nothing. No breathing, no movement, no sound from inside the room. I opened the door. The bed was occupied. There was no hesitation this time. No shadowed outline. No ambiguity. A patient lay in the bed beneath neatly arranged sheets. Electrodes were placed correctly on the chest. Wires ran cleanly to the monitor mounted above the headboard. An IV line was secured at the arm. An oxygen tube rested beneath the nose. Everything looked exactly as it should. Too exactly. I stepped into the room. The smell hit me immediately. Strong antiseptic, sharper than the hallway, like the room had been prepared recently. The machines hummed quietly, their screens glowing with calm, stable numbers. I moved closer to the bed. The patient was still, not sleeping in the restless way I'd seen all night, but completely motionless. The chest rose and fell evenly beneath the sheet. I stopped at the side of the bed and looked down. The face turned slightly toward me was my own, not distorted, not wrong, mine. The same features I saw every morning, the same faint scar near the eyebrow, the same mouth, relaxed and slack in unconsciousness. I stared, unable to process it. I took a step back, then another, shaking my head slowly as if the image might blur or shift if I refused to accept it. It didn't. The body on the bed didn't move. The machines continued their steady work. The monitor displayed stable vital signs, cycling calmly as if nothing about this situation was unusual. I looked down at my hands, trembling, real, and then back at the patient, at myself. A wave of confusion washed over me, followed quickly by something sharper, heavier, a pressure behind my eyes and in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I turned toward the door. The call light inside the room was off. That detail landed harder than anything else. It hadn't turned off when I opened the door. It had turned off once I was inside. My thoughts snapped backward, replaying the night in fragments. The first light, the second. The way they'd stopped the moment I entered. The way I'd told myself it didn't matter. A line of text surfaced in my mind, clear and unmistakable. Never respond to call lights from rooms listed as vacant. My stomach dropped. I had responded. I'd walked into empty rooms. I'd crossed thresholds I wasn't supposed to cross. I'd told myself I was fixing problems, verifying systems, doing my job. I wasn't supposed to be there. My breathing quickened as the realization took hold. The ward hadn't changed around me because it hadn't needed to. The rooms hadn't filled on their own. I had been filling them. I looked back at the bed, at the still body connected to machines that now felt less like support and more like confirmation. "This isn't possible," I said aloud, my voice unsteady. The patient didn't react. The machines didn't react. They didn't need to. Panic surged, sharp and disorienting. My thoughts raced, colliding with each other as the weight of the rule settled in fully. I hadn't misunderstood it. I'd broken it. And only now, standing in a room that had never been meant to contain anything, I understood what that rule had been trying to prevent. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out the hum of the machines. I backed away from the bed slowly, my eyes never leaving it, my mind scrambling for something, anything that explained how I could be standing here while also lying there. There was none. The ward was silent. The machines continued their steady rhythm, and the knowledge that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross took hold completely, leaving me frozen in place, caught between the rules I'd ignored and the reality they had been trying to keep separate. The monitor began to beep. At first, it was a familiar sound, controlled even, the kind meant to alert without alarming. I recognized it instantly, the way you do after enough night shifts. A minor change, a deviation that required attention, not panic. The heart rate on the screen shifted downward by a few beats. I stepped closer to the bed without fully deciding to move. The machines continued their quiet work, the numbers updating in calm intervals. For a moment, I convinced myself it was temporary, a fluctuation, a reading that would correct itself. Then the beep came again, slightly slower. The waveform lost its clean shape, the peaks uneven now, no longer symmetrical. The monitor adjusted automatically, recalculating, displaying the change without judgment. I felt my chest tighten. "No," I said, my voice barely audible. "No, that's not right." The heart rate dipped again. I reached out instinctively, gripping the edge of the bed, grounding myself against something solid. The body beneath the sheets remained completely still. The rise and fall I'd been watching earlier seemed harder to detect now, subtler, as if I had to focus to be sure it was still happening. The monitor beeped again. This time, the pause between tones was longer. I tried to speak louder, to call for help, but the sound didn't come out the way I expected. My throat tightened, my voice catching somewhere before it could turn into anything useful. "Someone," I tried. The word dissolved before it reached the air. I drew in a breath and tried again, forcing my mouth to open wider, forcing sound out with more effort. The result was the same, weak, strained, swallowed by the machines. The numbers continued to fall. 70, 65, 60. The oxygen saturation followed, dropping in small, steady increments. There was no sudden crash, no dramatic alarm, just a quiet, methodical decline. Panic surged fully then, sharp and overwhelming. I tried to move closer to the bed, to do something, anything, but my body didn't respond the way it should have. The intention was there. The command was clear. My legs simply didn't act on it. I tried again. Nothing. It felt like shouting orders into an empty room. The beeping slowed further, each tone stretching out, dragging behind the last. The waveform faltered, briefly flattening before struggling back into uneven motion. I reached for the patient. For myself, grabbing the arm beneath the sheet. There was no response. The sensation in my hand felt distant, muted, as if my touch were delayed by a fraction of a second too long. I squeezed harder, desperate for any reaction, but the body remained unresponsive. The machines did not change course. The heart rate dipped again, 50, 45. The room seemed to narrow, the edges of my vision pulling inward. Sounds distorted, stretching and warping until the beeps no longer sounded like individual tones but parts of a single continuous noise. I tried to take a deeper breath. My chest wouldn't cooperate. Air moved in and out, but shallowly, unevenly, like my body no longer trusted itself to maintain the rhythm. I could feel panic clearly, sharply, but I had nowhere to put it. No way to act on it. The monitor beeped again. Slower now. Each tone felt heavier than the last, pressing into the room, lingering longer before fading. The waveform flattened briefly, then returned. Weaker. The light above flickered. Just once. I focused on it, clinging to the movement as proof that the room still existed, that things were still happening in a sequence I could follow. The machines continued their steady hum beneath the beeping, indifferent to the change unfolding. The heart rate dropped again. 35. 30. The monitor emitted a longer tone, drawn out, steady. I tried to scream. My mouth opened, my jaw straining, but no sound followed. My body remained locked in place, heavy and unresponsive, as if the connection between thought and movement had been severed. The oxygen saturation dipped below a number I didn't want to see. The waveform trembled, then flattened completely. A single, continuous tone filled the room. It was unmistakable. I stared at the screen, my thoughts racing uselessly, colliding without forming anything actionable. Training, protocol, procedure. None of it mattered now. There was nothing left to correct, nothing left to intervene. The sound continued, unbroken. The lights dimmed slowly, not cutting out all at once but fading in stages, as if the room were powering itself down. The edges of my vision darkened further, the center narrowing until the monitor was the only clear thing left. The tone stretched on, thin and unwavering. Everything else receded beneath it, the hum of the machines, the distant systems of the hospital, the sense of space itself. My last clear perception was the steady tone, unbroken, unwavering, and then it stopped. There was no sound after that, only silence.